For the past 2 hours, I have been to the Marriott in Baltimore where my wife is attending a conference. The plan was to surprise her by dropping her off and taking her out to dinner. Yes, that's right. For the past 3 months, I have suspected that my wife Megan might be having an affair with a colleague. Every time he went on a business trip, training, or conference, he always seemed to return later than expected. Tonight, I plan to keep it in the act and finish it all. Megan and I have been married for 14 years, with 2 beautiful children, Sarah, 12, and Todd, 10, who currently live with my mom. After dating for the last 2 years, we got married right out of high school. Megan, with her long brown hair, slender figure, and strong face, was always bright and cheerful. About 3 months ago, I thought our marriage was solid, but little things made me uncomfortable. I hesitated to confront him, fearing that I would appear paranoid or jealous. The conference that day was very close, allowing me to drop in unexpectedly and catch him in the act. At the hotel counter, I handed over my suit bag and introduced myself as Phil Jenkins. My wife Megan was attending an insurance conference in room 214, and she told me I could get a key there. After confirming my identity, the client handed me the key, and I excitedly headed for the elevator. When I caught him, thoughts raced through my mind about what to do, how to approach the situation, whether to knock or come in, and if he was alone with the security light on. Walking down the hall, I decided to use the key to open the door and see what happened next. Trying to stay calm, I opened the door and opened it to find Megan opening her briefcase and doing some paperwork. He turned around in surprise and expressed my sudden surprise. I explained that I had some free time and thought I would take her out to dinner. Megan welcomed the idea and thought she would stay the night, wanting some company. He gave me a big kiss. Realizing that my plan to fool him had failed, I jokingly asked for a quick moment before dinner. Megan suggested a pre-shower gesture, then promised a night of whatever I wanted. Convinced that my suspicions were unfounded, I was glad that I had not lost the woman I loved. We shared a brief session, and with a big smile, Megan headed to the bathroom for a shower. I pulled myself together and sat on the bed. Megan's toilet seat sat on the dresser, prompting me to check out an aspirin that eased my driving headache. No pills were found, but something strange in the side pocket caught my eye. I slowly took out 6 contraceptive packs and held them in my hand as I sat on the bed. After Todd was born, Megan switched to fertility drugs, which depressed her, leading to my vasectomy. Since then, we've been free of contraception or pills, and we've given up on contraception. Now the question is, why were these contraceptives in her toilet? I'm not stupid. Concluding that my wonderful wife had indeed cheated, I didn't know what to do next. Thinking about his work, I found a stash of clothes for emergency situations. Taking one, I poked a hole in the middle of each contraceptive and replaced them as I found them. While Megan was still in the shower, I contacted a friend from home. I told Freddie that I needed him to help me, and he agreed without hesitation. I asked him to wait for about an hour and then called me on the cell phone and explained that there was a pipe burst in the school and I needed to go back urgently. I assured her that she should call and I would take care of the rest. Freddie recognized the plan and promised to call around 7. I decided that I didn't want to spend the night with my wife. I regretted our actions and wanted to avoid complications. I would think about the driver at home, although I don't know what it is. I know that something needs to be done. When Megan got out of the shower, I tried to refrain from confronting her, burning with the desire to take revenge on the woman who was my wife. I'm not a rude person, and I usually keep my temper to myself. I realized that it was better not to inform him of my knowledge of his infidelity. When I got to the dining room, I was very disappointed. I suggested that Megan order whatever she wanted. He replied that he was not very hungry and decided on a small bottle, offering to go with it, along with a bottle of rosé. After placing the order, I couldn't resist doing a little research. I asked Megan if she was happy with our marriage, and she answered confidently. She recalled a good home, 2 grown children, and a loving husband, and said she couldn't ask for more. I shared my doubts about how I would do everything to make her happy, how lucky I was to have such a wonderful wife, and how I had to push myself to believe that it was real. Megan calmed me down, called me a silly goose, and so I walked all the way to see her. He said he didn't think I had anything to worry about because he was happy and content, and he believed I was doing the right thing. He added that a woman could not ask for a better husband. Our dinners arrived and we made small talk throughout the meal. As the plates were being cleared, my cell phone rang. So as not to disturb the other diners, I excused myself to the lobby and waited a few minutes before returning. I explained that my friend Freddie had called about a water pipe break at school. I apologized and said that I really had to get back sooner, resulting in the planned night being canceled altogether. Megan's face looked desperate, but I couldn't tell if her feelings were true. It didn't matter to him whether I stayed or left. Either way, he would face the consequences. As they got into the elevator, Kirk Langford got off and greeted Megan, recalling that she had stopped by the room for dinner but had not received a response. He reached out, introduced himself as Kirk Langford, and said that Megan always talks about me. I explained that I had gone down for the night, but had to return due to an emergency, and it was difficult to shake hands and smile pleasantly. As we got into the elevator, I spoke to Megan again, expressing her desire to quit and my discomfort with working with Kirk. I stressed that we had talked before, and it was very important to me. Megan responded that she didn't want to quit, that she was enjoying her job, and that she didn't want to learn more from Kirk. She told me that I needed to get over the paranoia about Kirk and him. After a quick kiss in the room, I grabbed my bags and headed home. On the way home, I couldn't shake the thought of Kirk stopping by Megan's room after dinner. When I got home, I was a wreck. I hated my wife for what she did. I wish I was good at figuring out ways to catch cheating spouses, but I'm stumped. What can I do? I couldn't even figure out how to avoid intimacy with him. I really wanted a divorce, but lack of sufficient evidence defeated me. My wife was unfaithful, and I knew it, but I couldn't do anything about it. Unwilling to hold back, I asked for help. 2 days later, Megan came home happily, making me even more angry. Checking her bag, I found the rest of the contraceptive still with the hole. On Saturday, Globus Insurance Company brought a picnic for the children to enjoy. I was not looking forward to this day. I doubted that some colleagues were aware of the situation. I kept a low profile, trying to keep a low profile so I wouldn't be the subject of rude jokes. Maybe I was a little paranoid, but I couldn't help it. Megan was enjoying herself, interacting with Kirk and the others, and while they weren't engaging in any physical gestures, they were undeniably close. I was fine with not paying attention. A woman named Janet Langford introduced herself and said, "I must be Phil Jenkins." It was amazing, and I was really confused. I thought about my wife a lot, and even though I loved her, Janet Langford looked like a pinup model with tall blonde hair and big blue eyes. Despite being a little short, her perfect body made Kirk wonder why he would ever cheat on someone like her. After exchanging favors, we agreed to find a quieter place to talk. Sitting by the lake, we settled on a few benches about 100 miles from the picnic area. I offered to listen to what Janet wanted to talk about. He hesitated and expressed difficulty in bringing up the delicate subject. That's when I knew he was aware of the affair. I decided to make it easy for him by reminding him of what I had just learned this week. Janet was relieved and shared that she had known for about 2 months. He explained his plan to file the divorce papers and revealed that he had hired a detective to gather evidence. Her attorney suggested Megan's willingness to testify or sign a notarized statement about the case would strengthen her case. I asked about the type of evidence, and Janet mentioned that it was photos and phone conversations. Although he doesn't have videos yet, he believes the photos are powerful. It also had times and dates that could be used as evidence. Janet expressed her willingness to work on it, and my attorney asked if she could help me with the same divorce papers using some of the evidence I had. He stressed his lack of evidence and thanked me for any help I could provide. I am also taking legal action against Globy. I have statements confirming that company officials at the management level were aware of this practice and took no action to stop it. They are facing an election. Stop both people involved or face $1 million lawsuit. Fascinating, isn't it? Kirk is playing golf tomorrow morning. Can you come home in the middle of the morning? You must leave in the afternoon. I can show you what happened and we can figure out what we can do. I live at 26 Hemlock Avenue in Crestmont. Okay, this is the plan. Not really a date, but you know what I mean. We both had a bit of a crush. I felt at ease with him. We returned to the picnic area and no one noticed our absence. I felt better. Maybe this will clear up all the confusion. I believe. As expected, the next morning, Megan told me that she had to work at the store and that it would be a few hours after she left. I dropped the kids off at my mom's and headed to Crestmont. Janet met me at the door and we entered the den. A plush leather couch decorated the room, and on the table in front of him was a large computer monitor displaying an image of an empty motel room. He motioned me to sit down and offered me beer, soda, and wine. I chose regular soda, specifically Pepsi. I asked Janet to share what happened. Janet explained that in a few minutes we would be watching her husband's golf round and play in full color. He thought he might recognize Kirk's escort. When I asked how she arranged it, Janet said it would cost $400 to set everything up, and Kirk would cover the cost. He expected the session to last about 2 hours, so he encouraged me to get comfortable. He mentioned that there was popcorn and nachos, and added that I should get a DVD of the entire session, happily handing me a copy. While he admits he doesn't want to see the events unfold, he says he wouldn't miss it for the world. We engaged in small talk for about 20 minutes, during which Janet shared the information she had gathered about the case, including photos, tapes, and documents. The details she provided both surprised and devastated me, and confirmed Megan's actions. To her surprise, Janet discovered that she had 3 large koi ponds in her backyard. I wanted to come see the kids, and he liked it. At that moment, the monitor activated, and just as Janet had predicted, Kirk and Megan entered the room and immediately made out without engaging in small talk. The video was clear, although the audio was a bit muffled. I felt uncomfortable watching my wife and her husband on the couch doing human things with a stranger. Janet said, "Wow, you don't see a body like that very often." I managed to smile, but I didn't know how to respond. In fact, seeing my wife in such a state left me speechless. The experience became increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, I turned to Janet, expressed my discomfort, and asked if I should look into all of this. I thought he didn't keep looking. Janet confirmed that she really wasn't interested, and we decided to stop watching. To be honest, it's a little uncomfortable to witness my wife engaging in human activities with another man, and I feel a little uncomfortable watching her with you. However, the whole incident is being recorded, which we need for lawyers, and we don't have to look at it. I can't say I enjoy it, and the plot is predictable. Are you planning to go home or something? Well, actually, I was hoping you could show me the koi ponds. I think that would be a lot more fun than 2 hours of slapping and shaking. His eyes lit up because of my interest in his hobby. On the way to the back of the house, Megan reached her climax, and I couldn't imagine having more fun than my wife for the afternoon. The 3 fish ponds were fantastic, and I was particularly interested in the pump and filter systems, given that I worked as a plumber before school. Kirk didn't help him at all with his hobby, and he had to hire people to do pipe work or pump work. I offered to help Kirk while he played golf, not out of any romantic intentions, but to learn more about koi ponds. Spending time with him was an added bonus. A few hours later, we returned home. The motel room was empty, indicating it was time for me to go home. Janet promised to call when Kirk had another golf game so I could be with Sarah and Todd. The next few weeks were difficult. Every time Megan bathed, I would check her bag for a fresh supply of contraceptives. I couldn't understand when he took the time to use them all. I saved the security pin in my keys, now ready for any bite. I expected Megan to have a surprise visit with her sister. In the evenings after Kirk's golf games, the kids would excitedly tell Mrs. Coy that they were coming, show Megan pictures of fish they had drawn, and share their names. He never associated Kirk's wife with Mrs. Coy and seemed relieved that I could hold the children while I dealt with the other children. I tried twice more to convince her to quit her job and stop being involved with Kirk. I got the same rejection both times, and the second one was particularly unpleasant. I also started making excuses for not being close to him, and he responded with digs about my masculinity. It was a little shaky, but it made everything I did so much easier. Finally, on Tuesday night, she dropped the bombshell, revealing that she's been really stressed lately. Megan suggested that she take a few days off from work and visit her sister for about a week. He recognized my hard work overtime and nights and thought it would be good for me to relax while he was away. Megan believed that my sister's trip would be much better than cutting it a year short. He assured me that he would take care of everything and encouraged me to relax. Megan was happy that I understood the need for extra work for the benefit of the family, but I worried that she might be overdoing it. I tried to sleep that night, busy with the tasks that awaited me the next day. I was relieved that this moment had finally arrived. Megan's sister, Nancy, and her husband, Brad, lived about 3 hours away. Brad, while a nice guy, can be a real jerk, especially when Nancy calls the shots. Interestingly, there were 2 fertility clinics in their town, and I collected their names, addresses, and hours of operation. I even went over the terms of the agreement required for service at each clinic, noting the cooling-off period for both. Assuming Megan's first appointment was on Wednesday, the earliest she could confirm the procedure was Friday, giving her a few days to recover before returning home. This gave me a day and a half to complete my seemingly manageable plans. As Megan began her journey of rest and recovery, I began to prepare. I had to admit my husband's failure and explain the situation to my parents. They were understanding and supportive. The kids enjoyed their time with my parents, and Dad's car would come in handy for moving Megan's things, and the lawyer would do the paperwork I needed on Thursday morning. Janet's paperwork is also done, and she plans to serve Kirk at the same time I serve her. The only internal struggle I faced was whether to give Megan one last chance to make amends. Even though I had little hope, Dad and I spent the rest of the day packing up Megan's things. On Thursday morning, after a 3-hour drive, I arrived at the first clinic, feeling desperate. That left me with another option: Family Planning Center. I approached the receptionist confidently and told her that I was Phil Jenkins and that my wife, Megan, would come and sign the agreement form. When the receiver asked about the specifics of the form, I admitted that I didn't know the exact name, but I remembered the form, that I understood everything, agreed to it, and would not take legal action. The receptionist confirmed Megan's identity and noted that her sister had signed for it, but that my signature would have been better. He scanned the computer for a few seconds, then retrieved the file. I took the opportunity to sign the form under Nancy's signature. Seeing that the procedure was scheduled for Friday at 11 a.m., with the requirement to be there an hour early, I inquired about the remaining fees. I took out my checkbook and placed it on the counter. The receptionist assured me that Megan had paid the full amount of $800 and nothing else at that time. I thanked her for her help and told her it made the process easier. When Nancy and Brad arrived at their place, the reception was cordial, bordering on laughter. Megan started the conversation, surprised by my presence and asking what I was doing there. I responded by explaining that Mom and Dad wanted to keep the kids for a few days, so I went on sick leave and decided to visit them. I also said I needed to open up a bit. The room went quiet for a moment, and I felt the wheels turning in everyone's heads. I had put them in that place. Now they had to find a way out. I nodded to Nancy Brad and signaled for her to join me in the kitchen. Megan chatted casually about various topics. A few minutes later, Brad came back into the room with an offer. He suggested that he take the next day off, borrow his friend Jack's boat, and spend the day on the lake so as not to disturb the women. I agreed that a day's walk to the lake would wash away all my worries. I offered to see if Jack could join us, and Brad agreed to set it all up. Everything seemed to be relieved the way it was. We had an impromptu dinner and spent the rest of the evening talking about various topics. However, there was no intimacy that night because Megan didn't want her sister to overhear. The next morning, Jack waited with the boat and prepared lunch while Brad filled the fridge with beer. We talked as we loaded the truck and the boat. Brad was standing by the passenger door asking if I was getting in the truck. I decided not to go and suggested that I make the most of the day, as meeting Nancy in the next few hours was not going to be pleasant. Brad spent about 5 minutes trying to convince me before he had to brace me. After some well-placed swear words and some physical threats, Jack and Brad left. I went inside, poured myself some coffee, and turned off Nancy's cell phone. Then I called my dad, who was always early. We talked for about 2 hours, constantly waiting for a call. Brad must have been trying to reach Nancy for hours. After Nancy and Megan got up, I said goodbye to Dad and prepared for the impending confrontation. I cleared the missed calls and turned on Nancy's cell phone. In less than 2 hours, Megan and Nancy were due at the Family Planning Center. In about 5 minutes, I would be confronted by 2 angry women. I finished the first pot of coffee, so I made a new one for my wife and sister. Megan asked why I was there. I explained that I wasn't in the mood for fishing, so I decided to stick with them for the day. I suggested we find a nice place for lunch together, noting that I had to leave that night and that I didn't want to be on the boat with Brad and Jack. Megan rejected the idea, saying that she and Nancy had plans for the day and wanted to go on their own. He insisted that he could go out with me whenever he wanted, but he only got to see Nancy twice a year. Besides, he indicated that I would be there all week. I tried to convince Megan that she could save me at least half a day since I was going there. I suggested that she spend the rest of the week doing sister activities. Nancy dialed a number on her cell phone and left the room. Megan sat in a chair, looking as defeated as a pound by a truck. We could hear Nancy yelling at Brad over the phone as if he had committed the crime of the century. I felt sorry for the guy, but he married her. Megan herself and Nancy expressed their reluctance to set a date for me, stressing that their plans were already set, and it didn't involve me. I decided to hear their plans for the day and decide if I was interested or if I would find something else to do with my time. I expressed my confusion about the situation because they had a week, and I was only there that day. I jokingly asked if they were dating some guys. Megan revealed that they weren't meeting any guys, but were planning to shop for things like bras, underwear, and hot nightgowns. He explained that these are things that guys don't want when they try them on. I suggested that most of those stores were in the mall, and I could be busy with other things while they were using the dressing rooms. At lunch, I suggested that they tag along and stay out of the way, assuring me not to worry about entertainment. I promised to take them somewhere to make up for the trouble they had caused. At that moment, Nancy stood in my doorway without saying a word. Megan saw that she couldn't reason with me and seemed ready to give up. Both were in their dressing gowns, and eventually Megan stood up. Megan said she needed to get dressed and leave the room. Nancy looked at me and called me a real bone before following Megan upstairs. About 20 minutes later, the phone on the phone lit up, indicating that someone upstairs was calling. The clock was ticking and we had an hour to get to the center. I figured the next step would be, if they tried to leave without them, to follow them and make sure they knew. But I didn't believe they would do it. After 20 minutes, they both came down the stairs. Megan added a little attitude when it was time for me to go shopping. Surprisingly, it was a little easier than I thought. I thought that a call upstairs to the family planning center would probably reschedule the appointment. When I said I was leaving that night, they probably figured the best way to solve the problem was to wait until I left. I wasn't trying to stop Megan from stopping, but I wanted to make it harder. I wanted to take my car because I wanted to drive. I didn't want them to dump me a few miles from home. I pulled into a service station, filled up the gas tank, checked the oil and water, and cleaned the windshield. This was the longest time I've ever had a car serviced, and both sat with smoke. When we got to the mall, I parked far away so we could have a good walk. I left them pretty much alone when I was at the mall. I looked at them, but could care less about what they did or bought. They didn't seem to be having fun. Most of the time, they talked and gestured to each other. They bought a few things to show that they were in the store. I tried to hide it, but I still remember them. Certainly, a serious debate was going on. The appointment has expired. I was able to delay the inevitable. I knew she was still going to get the procedure, so I wasn't going to bother her anymore. In the afternoon, they returned to the central court of the mall, and I said I would meet them. We went to the Olive Garden for lunch and returned home around 2 p.m. There wasn't much conversation during lunch or with the driver. I kept smiling to myself. I knew that these two were now upset with me and ignored me. What a wonderful feeling. I grabbed a beer and relaxed on the sofa. Finally, Brad came, and for about 30 minutes, Nancy verbally abused him. He wandered off, disappeared for a few hours, and returned at dinner time. After the girls cleaned up, I asked to speak privately with Megan in the kitchen. Nancy scoffed as they both walked into the room. Megan was upset because of what had happened, and I felt that she was not going to be easy to deal with. I got straight to the point, stating that I wanted to quit my job and stop seeing Kirk Langford. His teeth were clenched and he struggled to beat me. He continued that he didn't want to hear it again, expressing his frustration that I had brought it up again and again. Megan refused to waste her time answering me, saying that I already know the answer and it won't change. He gave me an ultimatum to change the subject or leave. I reached over to the manila envelope beside the chair and pulled out a legal-sized envelope. I explained that I had asked him at least 10 times in the past 2 months, and he always refused. I presented the divorce papers, which I suggested she sign and mail. I said I have a sealed envelope, and if the lawyer wants to look at them, he's welcome. He looked at me and leaned back against the table with an expression of disappointment. He said I couldn't get a divorce because he wouldn't quit his job or because he had friends I wanted. Megan said there had to be grounds for a divorce, and I didn't have any. He told me it was time to go home and get the act together. He stressed that he was my wife and that he wasn't going to give up his home and family just because he didn't like his job. I responded by reaching into a manila envelope and taking out a set of photos. I put 6 pictures of Megan with Kirk on the table and asked if she would make love to him. After placing 6 more pictures in different positions on the table, the answer is no. As I continued to put more pictures on the table, she started yelling at me to stop. I recognized his reaction, realizing that he took my actions as a spy. He criticized me, called me a sly person, and ignored my point of view. He asked why I didn't address the situation directly and accused me of treating him like a pervert, saying that my complaints hurt him. At that moment, my cell phone rang, and I answered it, only to find out that my father would be at Nancy's place in 10 minutes with Megan's things. When I hung up, he asked about the call. I informed her that my father was bringing his things to Nancy's place, explaining that our locks had been changed at our house. I offered to pick up the forgotten items if he would let me know. When I handed over the title to his car, he kept quiet, remembering that I had signed it for him. I put half of the money in my bank account into the envelope, about $200. I pointed out that he has the right to visit the children once a week and to have 1 overnight stay per month if he agrees to do so and has it notarized. I've added the DVD I made of him and Kirk at the Scandia Motel on May 10th, which is 2 hours long and captures everything in the pictures. After collecting the photos, I discovered that I didn't get any of them. I didn't care about your activities. I didn't appreciate being cheated on. Finally, I would like you to protect your love. I took the safety key out of the key and pointed it at the table. I opened the pin to Megan and explained that I had been using it for the holes in all my contraceptives for the past 2 months. I remembered that he had been using 48 rubber the past 2 weeks, and Kirk was happier than I could have imagined. He responded angrily, calling me a pitiful weapon and calling my actions the most despicable thing he had ever heard. I'm back. The most disgusting thing is having an affair with someone outside of our marriage. I may sound like an idiot, but he was a cheating partner. I told him he needed to run as my dad pulled into the driveway. I never said he never apologized or regretted his actions. When I left, I said goodbye to her and wished her luck with her graduation. On Monday, when she left the room, she finally started crying. Nancy rushed to comfort him, and Brad followed me out onto the front porch. Brad questioned my actions, saying I couldn't leave a 14-year marriage because of a misunderstanding. I confronted him. Why did my wife come with him to Nancy? Brad stared down at his feet for a few seconds as if thinking. Eventually, he apologized and offered to help me unload the truck. We finished emptying within 10 minutes and Megan started crying in the kitchen. I didn't know what she was crying about. I honestly didn't care. The following week, Kirk and Megan were both fired from Globey. Megan refused to sign the affidavit. The lawyer said he had enough work without him. I haven't heard from my beloved wife at all. After that night, he did not come to see the children. They didn't mind that they had developed a good relationship with Janet. We spent a lot of time together as a family. Most of the time, there was no affection or even conversation. We weren't going to do anything to risk divorce. The kids and I learned a lot about COI and had a great time. Finally, after 4 months, both divorced. Megan never fought him, but Kirk kicked and screamed. She lost the house, all her investments, and had to pay huge monthly alimony payments. A few days before Christmas, Megan came home with presents for the children. I was polite and didn't do anything to spoil the holiday spirit. He stayed about 2 hours and then left as quietly as he had come. There was no mention of a divorce or an affair between us. I put the house up for sale, and Janet and I moved in 2 months later. Kirk took a job in Omaha, and Megan went with him for a few months. Kirk later disappeared and wouldn't tell her where he was going. After Brad left to work on the Alaskan pipeline, Megan moved back in with Nancy. 2 months later, Nancy received divorce papers in the mail. The two sisters are a good match for each other. Janet and I are comfortable with each other. The kids like him, and they feel the same way about him. We plan to get married in June, and are spending every moment we can on our honeymoon. The second story, we needed to have a serious talk, no doubt about it. Looking at the woman who has been my wife for over 2 decades, the past few years have changed the dynamic between us, he said, his voice cracking. Mike and I are no longer together. I bowed my head and offered my condolences as he stood there, hands clasped together in excitement. He shared that it has been almost 3 years since he promised that things would return to normal. I slowly researched the reasons for the breakup. Gwen, avoiding eye contact, has added to my unhappiness these past few months. The familiarity settled, the magic spark vanished. This situation pleased the familiar. I couldn't help but remember that more than 2 years ago, Gwen dropped the bombshell that our love life was becoming normal, and she was getting a lover, someone younger and stronger. He left me an ultimatum and made it clear that he wanted to continue working. Accept him or risk losing him, our home, our children, and the job I worked for his father. To top it off, he even threatened to charge me at home. The memories came flooding back, and the déjà vu was overwhelming. Gwen reminded me that this situation won't last forever. He thanked me for my patience and understanding. I blurted out without offering much to the conversation. He continued with his plans for our future. He offered to go back to normal. I could go back to our bedroom whenever I wanted. He even offered to do the same right away, citing his emotional distress at Mike's abrupt end to their relationship. Curious about Mike's actions, I asked what he had to say. Gwen, sobbing, said he criticized her for getting old and that she was overweight. She expressed her displeasure at being seen with him and mentioned that she wanted a younger man in her life. I was careful not to disagree with Mike's judgment. I expressed that I did not want to sleep in the same bed again, given that Gwen and Mike had used it so many times. Gwen reminded me of Mike's absence when I was home and the times I was away at work or in France. He offered to get rid of the old bed and buy a new one the next day. I teased that a new bed might be nice, and an awkward silence ensued. In the end, Gwen reluctantly promised me that she would, admitting that we hadn't been together in over 2 years. He convinced me to go back to the way it was. I asked if it really could be the same, and Gwen confidently confirmed that it was. He expressed optimism that we will return to the way things were. Given the embarrassment to our family and friends, I asked if we could pick up where we left off. I mentioned how I stopped going to the village pub to avoid seeing my friends, knowing that Gwen and Mike were frequent. Gwen apologized that her actions must have been thoughtless. She justified her behavior, and everyone knows about her work with Mike. He pointed out that comparing Mike's prowess in bed to mine helped the situation. I reminded him of the hurtful comments his friends had made. She said that Mike was not better, but different and more exciting than our love life. Despite my understanding, I expressed my reluctance to return to our bedroom easily after the man had self-inflicted harm. Gwen suggested a weekend trip to Brighton, staying in a familiar hotel and driving my classic Jaguar XK140. I commented on the difficulty of going back to our old body routine. I shocked him by selling the Jaguar a year ago, showing how little he cared about my life. He was surprised in disbelief that I had sold my beloved car that I spent hours repairing. I told him we couldn't pay him back, and he suggested using money from the company or his trust to get another one. I refused, asking where the money was going to come from, not the sale. I explained to Gwen that 5 months ago she had signed a trust fund that was being held for our orphanage. He was surprised and asked where the money came from. I replied and informed him, including my decision to sell the Jaguar. I said at that time he was busy with his work and his microphone. Gwen asked about the financial health of the family company, and I confirmed that the company was fine, but not ours. He seemed to have forgotten the paperwork that had recently completed the deal. Wanting to understand our financial situation, Gwen asked if we were selling the business and if we were still rich. I let her stew for a while, allowing her to think about the changes that happened when she was in love with Mike. Then I discovered that the proceeds from the sale of his business would cover the mortgage on the house. Confused, he asked about a mortgage, indicating that he was financially isolated. I found myself spending half of my life on a 45-foot yacht because I retired early and planned to spend my days on the seas. Gwen expresses her distaste for boats in the sea. I acknowledged his feelings, but stressed that there was no place for him on the boat. He asked for an explanation as to why he thought there was not enough room in such a large boat, as if he did not like the sea. I explained to Gwen that the sailboat was only designed for 2 people, including the deckhand I had recently hired. Despite this, he still asked me to accompany him, suggested that we explore the Mediterranean or travel to the south of France, and reminded me of the good times we had with Mike last year. I interjected, remembering that there was only one cabin on the boat. He repeated aloud his surprise to a cabin and asked where the deckhand was. I discovered that deckhand was the woman I had been sleeping with for some time. Gwen burst into tears when she learned that the deckhand was Giselle, a 28-year-old French blonde with a passion for boating, cooking, and humanitarian work. The next day, I left for France to join the boat in Giselle, and Gwen was still crying. It took some time, but my plan worked. I didn't tell Quinn about the 6-bedroom villa I bought nearby and the money I saved until I sold the company. I looked forward to enjoying the pool with Susie, who was penned for not wearing a bikini top. I also looked forward to the joy of opening the garage doors where my old Jaguar XK140 had been sitting for far too long. Soon Giselle and I would be taken to a familiar French restaurant on the beach. As for Mike, he suffered bad luck when he beat himself up outside his favorite bar, including 5 broken ribs, dislocated knees, the loss of his wallet, and a piece of skin. The tables seemed to have turned, signaling the end of her happy days.